And then this village and abandonment. Meyer is abandoned sometime in the 1820s, Capitol probably in the 1830s. This is Capitol cleared off. And one of the things we find, and I don't know what this means, is one of the things that they have in common is this is a sword at Capitol that's stuck in the ground. This is a stone blade at Meyer at Capitol, sandstone that's stuck in the ground. At Capitol, it's in a pit that's filled with groundstone. At Meyer, there's pits filled with groundstone. At Meyer, the blade is antler. But there's something in all three of the houses, and I wonder whether it's an abandonment or it's related to abandonment, because it's usually at the top, high up, just under the floors or something of that kind. But it's one of the things, one of those details that all three sites have in common that is very evocative. And then this is a photograph dug up by my former student, Melissa Darby. I say former, she's not my student anymore. She wasn't a student. Anyway, the only known photograph of the Chinookan house was in the newspapers in the 1880s. You can see the vertical planking and things like that. So, and then a little bit about environmental change. This is about elk. The elk at Meyer and Capitol are enormous. So measuring their heel bones, they're up here in that circle. Regular modern elk are down here. So they're much larger. There's an easy boundary line. So we have these enormous elk locally. And they could be representative of Roosevelt elk, the huge subpopulation in terms of physical size. The Roosevelt elk up on the Libby National Park, maybe a subspecies. We're trying to figure that out. But they were very, very heavily hunted. So whatever was going on here was a place where elk could get really big. So that would mean it was unusually good habitat for elk. And so we wonder again, and they disappeared sometime in the 19th century because the elk that are here now are introduced from elsewhere, is with human population decline, there's a shift in the way in which the land was managed. And the elk went with the management. We don't know that, but it's something that we're puzzling about and trying to come to. So when Katie said we're doing a retrospective, this is a long list of things we don't know. There's also archaeology continuing on post-epidemic, after 1830s, after 1840s. Colleagues at Port Vancouver are working at the village. It's a very complicated, multicultural village that was associated with Port Vancouver. Liz Sobel is doing work around Long Island and Wilton Bay. Late 19th century with oral traditions and looking at sites and things like that. Bob Losey from University of Alberta is out mapping fish traps. I don't know if that's post-contact or not, but I put this in, I'm not going to talk about it, but I put this in to say the archaeology doesn't stop with the 1830s or 1840s. We're actually moving it along into, well into the 19th century. This is one of those slides I have in because I like it. It's also to tell me that the transition is coming. This is also Bill Holm. So what does this all mean? Clearly it's a very dynamic era on the lower river that still resonates. When I put that phrase in and I thought to myself, well, dog can. Of course it still resonates. But I don't know that people think about that, realize that things that were, events that transpired here 200 years ago still play out. So for example, we have depopulation, environmental change as a consequence of depopulation. That affects what people did when they got here, to farm, on and on and on. And then also simply the dynamic in terms of the relationship between the Euro-American population and the Chinook population, the other native populations. Those dynamics were set by these events. So it still plays out. But from the standpoint of the archaeology, what we see, going back to our metaphor of entanglement, we see a mosaic of responses and outcomes. We look at different parts of one house at Capitol, and we're seeing different distributions of trade goods. We see different responses at Meyer and at Capitol. There are some responses that cross-cut. We do see increased levels of production and exchange, and I'm really curious about the increases in production, again, in a period of population decline. There are lots of possibilities that we have to think about. You see, we know we would expect household and domestic shifts, but we think we can see them archaeologically. Again, we have to test that, but we think we can see them. And then also it's unpredictable from place to place, and even within places like Depopulation, it's unpredictable from one part of the house to the next. So it's a very complex mosaic, which means that this notion of entanglement seems to work. And also at multiple scales. We saw it at the household scale, we see it at the subcontinental scale of obsidian exchange. And we teased it out with the material record, we teased it out. It's not going to show up in documents. So, yes. Of course, that's a setup because I knew that's how it was going to work out. Katie asked me to talk a little bit about archaeology and relationship among archaeologists and native peoples on the lower Columbia now. And I thought, that's what I thought, well, entanglement might work as a metaphor for that. When we think about archaeologists and Native Americans, we often see it through, or think about it through the prism of Kennewick, and that's an entanglement that didn't go well. But also, there's another site, Onioni's Cave, which is in southeast Alaska. It's a bear den, and a young man, at about the same time that the fellow at the Kennewick either drowned or was buried about 9,000, 9,400, he unfortunately ended up in a bear den for reasons that are pretty obvious. He's a bear jaws. And it went very differently. Terry Fifield, who's a Forest Service archaeologist up there, actually, when he heard about it, happened to be on his cell phone, was shopping at a Safeway, and one of the local Tlingit village chiefs or his wife was also in Safeway. They were buying tomatoes or whatever it was, and Terry started a conversation. And because of his relationship with the Tlingit, it went very, very differently, to the point that the site with the human remains were retrieved. The Tlingit met and came up with what they expected, how they wanted it to go. Active participation in the work, a series of other kinds of things. The remains were examined, they were looked at, the science was done, and then they've been reburied without a whole lot of fuss. So, so there are two contrastive versions of this. It hasn't always been that way. So in much of North American archaeological history, unfortunately, it proceeded without talking to anybody, with any descendant communities, be they Native American or African American or the local Euro-American population. And much to our amazement that when we began to be aware of that, we were discovering that ticked people off. So this is an excavation of a mound in the southeast, and there's somebody down here in the corn. And I was looking for illustrations for this part of the lecture, and I was trying to find something. And I looked at it and said, well, that's kind of, that might be symbolic of where local Native Americans might have been in terms of that, the way that went in the 30s was somewhere out in the cornfield. I suspect that actually that's probably a scarecrow, which may also be kind of symbolic of that activity. But anyway, this is Alcatraz. Blind DeLorean Jr. published this book with a scathing indictment of the way anthropology and archaeology was conducted in the United States. People became very concerned with looting. This is the site of the Columbia Gorge. They also became very concerned. One of the, of course, crux issues was the enormous number of human remains, native human remains, held in American museums. It was a source of enormous rage. Footnote, people would often say, well, that's all for political reasons. They didn't used to care. Well, locally they cared. There are a number of early accounts of Chinook people going to Hudson's Bay and complaining angrily back in the 1830s, 1850s about people messing with their graves. So it's not politics. So anyway, and what happened, a variety of laws, and I'll spare you the acronyms, mandated that archaeologists talk to their constituents. Among them were Native Americans. We called it consultation. And I went online to try to find pictures of consultation, and I found these two women had a very pleasant conversation. And okay, well, that's how some consultation goes. Sometimes it doesn't go like that at all. I also don't know what it means that the women are having a nice conversation and the guys are coming to blows. And I was at a few early meetings which a lot of the anger about burials was being expressed. And, anyway, now you find pictures like this. In other words, consultation has become the way we operate. It's a formal part of the way we operate. It's very formal, well worked out, it has flow charts. This is actually for 06. There are a few contract archaeologists or agency archaeologists who look at this and think, yep. And actually, consultation with the tribes up here in that corner, a whole bunch of other stuff, but it's a very formal process. It's an important thing that actually the formal process exists because particularly 20, 30 years ago, because of the raw emotions, it gave everybody a framework in which to work. And it still is important. But it's not exactly what I wanted to convey. This is actually something about proteins. But it's a very complicated network. You can see all of the connections in here among the little dots. And the dots could be individuals, they could be archaeologists, they could be Indian people, they could be tribal councils, they could be factions, they could be non-Indian people, they could be a whole bunch of things. And there's this elaborate and complicated network. And so what I'm trying to get to is that yes, there's consultation, but what is evolving is this kind of network, this sort of entanglement, this kind of, and it's also to remind me, one of the things that's very interesting about it is that in terms of whatever you call it, you often have discussions among people among whom everybody's right, but we don't agree. The fundamental basis upon which we're right is not the same. And so, of course, the goal of ethics is to somehow to deal with that, to come to common ground, to come to work your way around that or with that. And I tried to figure out some way to animate that. No, I'm not going to do that, I'll just say it. But that's a crucial part of this, is that these discussions, are people of everybody have good intentions, and we can't agree. We wouldn't have to do it if we hadn't agreed. We can't agree, we're not going to agree. We have to figure out, okay, how do we do this? How do I be the best archaeologist that I can be in terms of this situation? And then we work our way to something.